Welcome back to PowerPivot table version 1.2. In this particular topic or in this particular video tutorial, we will be learning 57 different topics in this list, and I'll be adding 3 more dimensional class on Power Query, PowerPivot, and how to use Power Query and what are the do's and don'ts in the Power Query. This particular video tutorial will be broken into multiple videos. So I'll be adding at least 30 plus videos in dimensions and so on. Let's see how to deal with pivot table. Before we start learning about pivot table, we should know what is a pivot table. So I've mentioned them in a small list. I'll be adding a PowerPoint presentation for you. Then I'm going to show you right now. What is a pivot table? When I say pivot table, or I can call this as a power pivot table, because this is going to be a complete learning of how to use pivot table from scratch to the top. From a inbuilt functionality or from a basic data where we don't have any bigger data into it, and we'll see how to create an imaginary data, how to create a data with a proper data set, and so on. This is a one-stop shop for all your pivot table learning. Let's see what is a pivot table. So when somebody asks you a question, what is a pivot table is all about? Then you can answer them in a one-liner called, it is a calculation with criteria. Or you can even call them or say it as another dimension or explain them as another dimension called summarized data. Or you can say that I can create a report based on a calculation of a criteria or a condition given to me as an agenda. That is what pivot table is all. Again, when I do create a pivot table, as a trainer, when I started working in the real world scenario, many people used to say that, when you do a pivot table, it is working for you effectively. And we try to do it, we are not able to get it done. I really don't know why. The reason why is I used to follow these simple rules in pivot table, which allows me to handle pivot table effectively. So if I want to use a pivot table, my data has to have the following 3 rules, or the first 2 rules should be as a mandatory rules. If the first 2 rules are satisfied, the third rule has nothing to do with it. But not all the table range or all the data model or all the data that I'm trying to build a pivot table will have the necessary data that I'm looking for. The golden rules of pivot table will be you have to have a heading for all the columns that you have in the table or range. And your data has to be a proper data set. That means there should be a black cell in a cell or a row or complete column. But unfortunately, that's not the way in how the world works, or that's not the way in world the data will come to us. If I have a blank row, cell or a column, check out whether you can able to delete those rows so that you can make the data as continuous data. Or else, if the data allows you to add a 0, then do. If these 3 components are not possible, then we need to improvise our pivot table so that we get the data work effectively. I will even show you if I get something like that, or if I get a data like that, how do I handle that? And when I go down to the list, I set that proper data set. So what is a proper data set? So I should have a field name first on the first row, and I should not have any empty cells in my rows data. And if I'm taking a data, so I cannot have a data in a broken status. So I have to have the data in a continuous process. That's the first step. Let me show you a data first and then see how we're going to work in a pivot table. If you want to work in a pivot table, so what should you? I have a data here, and this is the data that I'm about to deal with, and this is what the result that I want to achieve. These results can be achieved not just by a pivot table, even by other means, but the time that you take to achieve these 3 tables using other formulas is going to lot of. So let's see how I'm going to do that with ease in the pivot table. Before I go forward into the pivot table, I would like to give you a small introduction on the pivot table anatomy and a pivot chart anatomy. Let's create a pivot table first, and then I'll show you the anatomies that we're going to do. When I go to pivot table, the keyboard shortcut that I can use to build a pivot table will be the following. If you're using 2003 version, then you can use Alt-DP. That still works in the current version. And if you're using 2007 and 10, then the keyboard shortcut is the same keyboard shortcut that I'm going to use right now with the latest version called Alt-N and P. If you are the user of 2013, 2016 version, then you may not use Alt-N-PT, you will be using Alt-N. But when you are back again to 2019 or 2021 version, or you're using the version that I'm using called Office 365, then you will get back the old keyboard shortcut that we have used in 2007 and 2010 version. That is called Alt-N. When I go to the pivot table creation, so these are the topics that I will come across when I create a pivot table. We call this as pivot table anatomy. Pivot table anatomy will have three fields here: pivot cache, pivot table fields, and pivot table analysis and design. Few of them are ribbon function, few of them are extra function which will pop up when you have a pivot cache. So what is a pivot cache? Pivot cache is a place where you place your pivot table from your range or a table feature in Excel. You can even bring a pivot table from a different dimension if you are using the version that I use. For each and every version, the pivot table design will be a little different from normal. And when I go back to the pivot table cache, once the pivot table cache comes to, when we place the cursor at pivot table cache, if you're taking a data like I do here, then on the right hand side, you will see a line called pivot table field. This pivot table field shows you 5 different boxes. The first box talks about the data that you have. The second box talks about the filter, columns, rows, and values. I'll show you each and every one of the options here. When I want to build a simple pivot table, I'll be using a row and a value. If I'm using a cross tab data type, then I'll be using row, column, and value. If I'm looking for more than that, then I will be adding one more dimension called filter. And when I go down to the next logic, so once we started creating pivot table on top of our screen or the ribbon process or in the ribbon view, you will see 2 different dimensions. The first one is called pivot table analysis. And pivot table analysis, I can able to create a pivot table with multiple sheets if I wanted to, and I can add the field list, I can hide the field list, I can create a pivot table or move a pivot table one table to another one, or I can even create a pivot chart or a recommended pivot table also can be created. Plus I can change the data source if I'm selecting a range, and if I am selecting a table, then I can refresh it, and I can also start using a slicer insertion from a pivot table analysis. And the next most important part of our pivot table is called design. This is where we color the pivot table called will or wish, and we'll be seeing a lot of this data called report layout and subtotals and grand totals in pivot table. In our next video, I'll show you how to create a basic pivot table from our raw data that I created. Stay updated. Happy learning. Catch you up with the next video.